There are many different types of firms. So one type of firm are private sector firms. These are owned by individuals and they typically seek to maximize profit. The majority of the GDP comes from these types of firms. On the other hand, you've got public sector firms, and these are owned by the government. So they don't necessarily seek to maximize profit. They may have other objectives. Similarly, nonprofit firms are not owned by the government, but again, they don't necessarily have profit maximization as their objective. They would seek to pursue other objectives. We're going to focus mostly on, well, entirely on private sector firms that seek to maximize profit. One of the main reasons we're going to look at these firms is that the majority of firms, most of the GDP is actually comprised of these firms. Secondly, when you have profit maximization as your objective, then the decision-making of the firm is very clear and it's much easier to model such a firm. Whereas if you're looking at a firm that's like a nonprofit firm, what the objective of that firm depends on, so the behavior of that firm is going to depend on what the exact objective is, and that's not going to be quite as clear. So we're going to make our lives simpler for this course and focus on private sector firms. Now, these private sector firms could have various ownership structures. One type of ownership structure is a sole proprietorship. Now, this is a firm that's owned by a single individual, and that individual would be liable for the firm's debts and would receive all the firm's profits. So if you think of the simplest concept of what a firm might be is, I'm going to just start manufacturing something in my garage and start selling those. Well, that would probably be a sole proprietorship. Now, the next step in sort of, in terms of more complicated structure would be a partnership. So two or more people would join together to form a firm. But otherwise, other than the fact that there's more than one person, it's very similar to a sole proprietorship in the sense that the individuals who own the firm are liable for the firm's debts, and they receive the firm's profits. A corporation, on the other hand, is quite significantly different from these types of firms. The corporation is owned by the shareholders. However, the shareholders are not liable for the firm's debts. And that's a very important difference. This idea of limited liability, so that the firm isn't able to pay its debts, the people who are owed cannot go after the owners of the firms to collect their debt. So in other words, the shareholders of the corporation can't be held responsible for its debts. So their personal assets are not used to pay those debts. So they can, the most they can lose is what they've invested in buying the shares of the firm. So if the share price drops, they lose that money. This is really important for the functioning of an economy, that we have the idea of limited liability, because it allows firms to take risks. It allows firms to make investments in things that might not work out. And if you only had sole proprietorships or partnerships where the owners would be liable for the firm's debts, then firms would be far less likely to take risks and invest in projects that would have potentially big payoffs, but might also not pan out. So typically, the ownership of a firm, so the shareholders are going to appoint firm's management. So you're going to have a board, and this board is going to appoint management for the firm, and they're going to be responsible for day-to-day running of the firm. The goal of the management is supposed to be to maximize shareholder value. So is to work to make decisions that are in the owner's interest. In other words, to maximize profit and thereby maximize the share value. Of course, in reality, managers have many competing interests, right? So they might have various conflicting interests. They might have, for example, they might, an employee working at a firm might be interested in in their private benefits, like a corporate car, and so forth. Nonetheless, in theory, the managers of a firm are supposed to be maximizing profits in the interest of the shareholders. So we're going to, for this course, now, the idea of how you incentivize, how the shareholders would incentivize the managers to actually act in their interest is a whole area of research, and it's a whole another area of economics, which we won't get into in this course. So for now, we're just going to assume that management actually does maximize profit. How you get them to actually do that, we won't worry about that for this course. But there is an entire literature on how you get that to happen. So what is the owner's interest? The owner's interest, like I said, is profit maximization. So what do I mean by that? Well, profit, which we often will represent by the Greek letter pi, is a difference between the revenue and the cost. So revenue is what the firm brings in by selling goods. Cost is the cost of the inputs for producing those goods. So the difference between what you receive and what you spend. That's what the shareholders would like to maximize.